Hi everyone, it's Ruth. In this video today, we're going to take a look at monotype printing. Now, monotypes are really great first prints to start with. So if you've never done any type of printmaking before, this is a good one to begin with. Monotype printing basically bridges the gap between painting and printmaking. It's one where the artist hand is very visible. So we're going to walk through that process today from start to finish. And you're welcome to pause and rewatch as often as you need. So let's start our process by taking a look at some examples of monotype prints. These are some really quick ones that I did the other day. And you can see they're very painterly. You've got a flower with a vase, some mountains. These are just a few examples of the type of prints that you might be able to create today. So I'll get these out of the way and let's talk supplies. The very first thing you need, as with every process, are the illustrated instructions. So we're going to be doing the monotype printing. It should be the first one right on top. And our illustrated instructions all follow the same format. At the very top, there's listed the supplies that you'll need to complete the process. And then the steps are laid out one by one. I'll be guiding us through this process today, but know that if you like this, if it's something you enjoy, here's your recipe card. You're able to repeat it or share it as often as you need. And of course, watch the video as many times as you need as well. But go ahead and pull out those illustrated instructions. We'll be using that today, following along with that today. The next thing we need is going to be our paper. So we're using regular sketchbook paper today. It's a really smooth surface. When it comes to printmaking, generally the smoother the paper, the better. So we're using that sketch paper today. Other great paper to use for this process is copy paper, construction paper. You can also print on things like magazine pages or calendar pictures, things like that. Like I said, typically the smoother the surface, the better for printing it is. So we're going to be using a few pages of our sketch pad today. So I'm just going to pull out a few pieces. All right. Now the next thing we need for this process is going to be our brayer. Now, a brayer is just a fancy word for roller, but the brayer that we're using today is a rubber brayer, and it's a really smooth surface. And the reason we use the rubber brayer is because it does a really nice, even transfer of pigment. You get a smooth surface, and that's what we want. The brayer we'll be using for a lot of our processes in this series. So go ahead and pull out that brayer. We'll be using that. The next thing we need is the block printing ink. It's going to be the black ink that's found in your kit. It may be in a tube like this, or it may be in a little container with a black lid. Either way, it's the same ink, but that's what we'll be using today. Later on in the series, we'll be using some acrylic paint as our pigment. But the difference between the acrylic paint and the block printing ink is that the ink takes longer to dry, so you don't have to rush. We can take our time with this process today. So go ahead and pull out your block printing ink. We'll use that as our main pigment. The next thing we'll need is our sheet of plexiglass. The plexiglass we're using has a protective layer on the top and bottom. You can peel those off if you like. I usually leave mine on so I can see where it is on the counter. So feel free to leave it on if you want or take it off. It doesn't affect how we do the print. Outside of the plexiglass, you can use sheets of glass. Sometimes I just go to the dollar store and pick up a picture frame and use the glass in the frame. So that's another way to get a larger size of plate. So we're going to be using this sheet of plexiglass as our plate today. The next thing we'll need is going to be our paintbrush. So you want a paintbrush that has some stiffer bristles. We're going to be doing kind of the opposite of painting today. Normally when you paint, you put pigment on your brush and then put it on the surface, paint it on the surface. But what we're doing today is putting the pigment on the surface and picking it up with our brush. So the harder the bristles, the better for this project. One thing you can bring in that's really helpful, but not necessary, are some Q-tips. So if you have some Q-tips lying around the house, go ahead and pull those out. I'll demonstrate in just a little bit the difference between using a Q-tip and a paintbrush, so you'll be able to see the texture difference. And then there's one thing that we need that's not in the kit, and that's going to be a way to clean the surface of your plate. After every print we pull, we're going to need to wipe off that plate. You can do that by going to the sink and washing it off, or by using a wet paper towel or a wipe. And I'm going to be using a wipe for mine today. You don't need many, just one, because you can use it over and over again. So I'm going to keep that handy for myself. The next thing I want to talk about before we start our printing is protecting our space. I usually work off a piece of foil, but you can work off a few sheets of newspaper, a disposable tablecloth, a wax paper, a tray, something like that will be really good. I always wear an apron when I do printmaking because I get kind of messy, and it's always good to protect our body as well. So I recommend either wearing clothes you don't mind getting a little messy or an apron like me. The truth is, if we are aware of our body and our space, that does keep accidents to a minimum, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. So let's go ahead and start our first print. I'm going to move these out of the way. So the process that we're doing today, and we'll pull the illustrated instructions out. The process that we're going to be doing today is very simply taking that block printing ink and with the roller, the brayer, we're going to smooth it over the surface of the plexiglass. We're going to cover that whole surface. And then once we do, we'll take our brush or our Q-tip and kind of draw into that ink. And after we're finished drawing, we'll carefully lay that paper on top, press it firmly, and then pull it up to reveal our print. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want to do is kind of show the difference between the Q-tip and the paintbrush. So I'm going to take a little bit of my pigment and put it on my plate. Now for this process, you want a thicker layer of the pigment. In other processes that we're going to do, we want nice thin layers, but this one, because we're removing the pigment, we want a nice thick layer. So I'm going to take my roller and just kind of roll it across my plate. You may find, as you're rolling it across your plate, that you may need to add some more pigment. We want that whole surface covered. We want it covered as evenly as we can get it. So it may take a minute. And as I said earlier, the big difference between this block printing ink and acrylic paint is that this gives us a little more time to work. We don't have to rush through it. So now that I have my surface inked up, I'm going to take my paintbrush and my Q-tip and just demonstrate some of the differences between the two. You can see from my paintbrush, when I pull it across my plate, it doesn't look like it's picked up a whole bunch. It's really just kind of moved that paint around. The truth is that paintbrush is going to be for more texture reasons, right? You'll get this really nice patterning, the nice design. With a Q-tip, something like a Q-tip, that gives you fine lines. So you can see my Q-tip picked up a lot more of that pigment. So if I want to kind of cover a surface, pick up a lot of pigment, I can use that Q-tip. It's picking up that pigment. If I want to kind of cover a space that leaves a pattern more than taking up a lot of that pigment, then doing that paintbrush is the way to go. I'm going to take my paper after I've done my design, which is actually just demonstrating the different tools. I'm going to lay my paper on top and press it down. Now, typically, there's a special tool that printers use to apply pressure during this process. But for what we're doing, you can easily use just your fingertips or the ball of your hand to apply the pressure. And as when you're pressing firmly, you want to make sure that you're covering every area of that surface, right? Making sure every piece of that paper, every part of that paper is touching that pigment. And then you can pull up your print. Now you can see in the demonstration that the paintbrush, it covers a larger surface, but it doesn't pick up all the pigment. Using that Q-tip really does pick up more of that pigment. So we can use our tools in different ways. Now, there's one thing about this print that tells me some extra information. You may notice where the black is, that it's not completely solid. So what that's telling me is that I need to add more pigment to my surface, and I need to work a little faster. It could be drying a little bit. And so I'm going to set my paper aside and let it dry. And it may take just a few minutes for it to dry. You can lay it out on a table or hang it up. Either way, it just needs a little breathing space to dry. So what I'm going to do now is wipe off the surface of my plate so I can do another print. We want to make sure that we're cleaning our surface between each print. And the reason for that is if you just inked on top of it, instead of wiping it off, your pattern, your first pattern comes through. And so you'll get kind of a hint of that in your new print. That's not necessarily a bad thing if that's something that you're going for in your print, but it's always good to wipe that surface off. And you'll see, I'm just going to kind of wipe my rag, my wipe across the surface to clean it up. Yeah, and then I'll be able to use this wipe over and over again. All right, so let's get started with our next print. Sometimes it's hard to know exactly what you want to do, what design you want to put in. Some of us may have an idea immediately, and so we know exactly what we want to draw in our pigment. But other times it's kind of like unsure of what you want to draw. So I always suggest drawing shapes just to start with. So you get kind of the feel of how the pigment feels, how the pigment acts, and how the different tools respond. And so that's what I'm going to do for my next print, I'll draw some shapes. Again, I'm going to take my pigment and just put a good amount on the surface. You may need to add more, but you'll know that once you start rolling the pigment across the surface. And again, we want to make a nice even coat. So just kind of spread it out, roll it back and forth until that surface is covered. And I'm going to start by drawing some squares. So I'm going to take that brush and I'm going to draw some squares to start, just kind of adding it all over my paper or my plate. What I was talking about when I mentioned earlier that that mono printing is kind of bridges the gap between painting and printmaking because there's a like reverse painting that we're doing with this process. I'm picking the pigment up with my brush instead of putting it down. So I'm just gonna start adding some more shapes to my paper or my plate. I'm just kind of adding to that design. Knowing it doesn't have to be perfect because I can easily change it and do a different print. So now that I've got my design drawn into my plate, I'm going to add that plate again, or that paper again. One of the things that you may notice is that I'm a little messy. So I've got some pigment along the outside. There are a couple ways to deal with that. You can either move the plate when you go to put your paper on, or you can lay paper covering that up. So when you put your paper that you want your image on, when you put that down, you're not getting that transfer. I'm just going to go ahead and put my paper on here. It's hard to kind of show that with the camera, but I'm just going to put my paper down here and press on my plate. And as I said earlier, we're not doing a whole lot of pressure. We're just pressing it firmly using the tips of our hands or the ball of our hand. We're just making sure all that pigment is touching the paper. You're just kind of rubbing it through, rubbing it around. Ready, pull it up. You can see that design is starting to show. One of the things that I notice about my print is that I need a little more pigment on one side. So when I pull my next print, I'll know to add a little more of that, a little more ink to that surface. So I'm going to do another one. I'm going to wipe this one off and do a different design. And again, we're doing it that same way. We're going to clean that surface off. I'm using my wipe. This process can get a little messy. You see my hands are already turning black. You can easily use disposable gloves to protect your hands. If you do get it on your hands like I do, know that it comes off with soap and water. It's not a permanent thing. So just that little hint while we're in the middle of doing our print. So I'm going to add a little more pigment to my plate. I'm going to use my roller to spread it across again. And again, we're just covering that surface. Want a nice, somewhat even coat, right? And then I'm just going to kind of draw with my paintbrush. I think I'm going to do a landscape here. Difference when you are using the paintbrush and when you're using that Q-tip, you can bring in other sorts of paintbrushes as well. They'll give you different patterns, different designs, and just kind of have fun with it. I think there's always a nice little surprise that we get when we pull a print because you can't quite see all the details when you're drawing into it. And so there's always that little surprise and what we're actually printing, which is kind of nice, that little reveal. I'm going to do a night sky. So I have a couple layers of ground and then a moon and some stars that I'm adding in. And just like last time, once you get your design in there, you've drawn it in, go ahead and take that piece of paper and press it into that plate and press it firmly. You want all that pigment to transfer from the plate, that plexiglass, to your paper. And so just kind of press it in. And once you've gotten every surface pressed down, go ahead and pull your piece up. And we have our landscape. You can see I've done better with the amount of ink that I put on there. I've covered more of the surface, and you can see that landscape as the lines going across it. I feel like this one's pretty successful. I hope you all have a wonderful time learning to print with our monotype printing process. I'm excited to see it. If you'd love to share images, we would love to see it. You can ask any questions you like that come up about this process just by reaching out to our contact at Mather email or on our Facebook page. Happy printing, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye.